Welcome to another episode of 22 at the Lips. This is the podcast, as I've said so many times before, and it sounds like a broken record. This is the podcast from EMS providers to EMS providers, healthcare providers, and anybody and everybody in between. I've had a variety of guests on the podcast, whether they're new guests I've had, or I've had very few repeating guests. And one of which today is going to be Phil Klein, like Klein Peter. So I haven't known Phil for a super long time, but we met through my discovery of his podcast, Stories from the Road. It is a phenomenal podcast. I think it's something that is so crucial and beneficial to the EMS community because he has these people on that they talk about their calls and these stories from the road. And it's things that are relatable. And it's things that, for me, makes me feel less alone in what we see and what we experience in the field. So, Phil, if you want to tell the people who you are, what you stand for, the floor is yours.
You're gonna put the work on me. I see how it is. So it's a pleasure to be back on your podcast. I know we did this I guess several months ago now. We had a chance to have a conversation, and you've been on my podcast, like you said, a couple of times and told, just some really incredible stories, probably some of the deepest stories I've had on the podcast. And I always appreciate hearing your perspective for a couple of reasons. I think, one, because you do such a phenomenal job in sharing these stories with my listeners, and I think your age has a lot to do with it being so young in EMS and having experienced just some really horrific calls. I think says a lot about you, and it's just something that's worth sharing with my listeners. So thank you for doing that. But a little bit about me, I like to tell the story. I was a community college dropout, so I graduated from high school and went to the local community college for a semester, and I played cards in the back of Western Civ with a couple of guys, and I don't think any of us passed. And I looked around and said, well, what am I going to do now? And by happenstance, I was walking across a parking lot, and a friend of mine from high school came over to me and he said, hey man, what are you doing tonight? I said, absolutely nothing. And he said, well, let's go to the firehouse. I'm going to become a volunteer firefighter and you should come with me. And I said, dude, I'm good. I don't want to catch on fire. I'm going to go figure out something else to do. And he said, no, you don't understand. He says, they have a big screen TV. They have beer. It's a great place to hang out, and you should do it. And I said, what the heck? I got nothing else going on. I'll go down to the local firehouse and I'll try it. And I went down there and I met the guys. And back then, if you wanted to be a volunteer, I don't know how it is now, but you have to hang around for a couple of months before they vote you in to the fire service. So I was just hanging around and really getting a feel for it. And I got voted in, and I got a chance to go ride on some calls, and I really got hooked. I got hooked on fighting fire, but I also got hooked on the ambulance calls. And I thought it was really cool that you could find somebody unconscious. I mean, we do it all the time now. We push Narcan and wake somebody up. But, as an 18, 19-year-old kid, that was really cool. So when I was a probie, they basically said, you can't go to EMT school until you get off probation because we're not going to pay for it. So me and my friend Jeff went to EMT school on our own and pissed a lot of people off. But we became EMTs, and he went to work for New York City EMS, and I went to work for a private ambulance. And we both ran across a flyer that said, hey, become a paramedic. And New York City hired paramedics. They didn't hire advanced EMTs or CCs or whatever they were called back then. So Jeff and I went to paramedic school, and I don't know, 9 months later, some ridiculous short amount of time, we became paramedics. No idea what we were doing. I was 20 years old. I was a New York City paramedic working in South Jamaica, Queens in the 90s with shootings all over the place and running a cardiac arrest every shift. And really just pissed a lot of the old timers off at the firehouse because none of them were paramedics. And we certainly, we were out educated. We out educated them, I should say. But that was my life. That was, I became a medic. I got hired by the police department. I was working for the Nassau County Police as a police medic. I was making great money, and I was set, right? That was what I wanted to do. And it always nagged on me that I failed out of college. So when I was about 24, 25, I went back to that community college and just started taking some classes at night. Eventually, I ended up getting an associate degree. I went on and got a bachelor's degree. I thought about going to law school. I was in New York in 2001 and left New York in 2002. So my plans changed, but I moved into higher education when I moved down to Georgia. I worked as a firefighter for a while, but eventually drifted into higher education, and that's where I am now. I work as a vice president at a community college, and I guess my second career as a higher education administrator and professional really has centered around EMS. I mean, I've never gotten away from it. I think it's just kind of grabbed onto me, and it never let go. And I was a paramedic EMS program director, and then I was a dean of health sciences, and I had to fix a EMS program. And then I moved on to another college, and I became a dean there, and I had to fix an EMS program. And I came to West Virginia, where I am now, and the first task I had was to create an EMS program. So, in a nutshell, I create EMS programs. I do some other stuff too, but I think the healthcare and the EMS programs have always been at the core of what I do. So that's it. I'm kind of boring now. I'm like a regular person. It kind of sucks.
Just out here creating EMS programs, being boring. Okay. Um, do you feel like some of that drive for the EMS programs kind of delves into like not just the background aspects of how we run in the field, but setting up a better future for the providers in the field?
Yeah. So I think my approach to EMS education is a little bit different. It's not necessarily setting up creating a better provider. It's creating a better opportunity for people to become providers. And I think that's what I focused on, at least over the last 3 years. So there are a number of EMS programs out there. Some of them are great, but there's an unreasonableness to education. It's not just EMS education. I think it's higher education and sometimes education as a whole. There's an unreasonableness to it, right? So, you've got to be in class on Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to 2. And if you're 5 minutes late 3 times, we're going to throw you out of the class. And to me, that is not very friendly for a student. That's not an environment to learn. So when I had the opportunity, when you get to a vice president level, you have a little bit of flexibility. And when I created this program here in West Virginia, I was very fortunate. I hired a program director that had never been a program director before. And she basically was willing to do whatever crazy idea I came up with. And, she just said, well, let's try it. So we created our paramedic program, our EMT program as well, but our paramedic program especially is in a high flex format. And what that means is we offer the same education face to face in class. We offer it live on Zoom or whatever platform we're using at the time, but then we also offer it in an asynchronous format. And what that basically means is that if you're a firefighter working a 24/48 shift or a California shift, we don't have class on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and you've got to be there from 6 to 10. We have class on Tuesday and Thursday nights. And if you are available, you can sit in the classroom and you can take that class. And if you're not available, if you're at the firehouse or you're on post, you can open up your laptop and you can still experience the lecture portion of class live via Zoom or again, whichever platform you're using. And if you catch a run or for some reason you're unavailable, well, you can do the asynchronous learning exercise that meets the same learning objectives as if you were sitting in class. And then we offer flexible labs so that you don't have a set time and day for lab. You can come in on open lab. You can experience lab in multiple days across the week. So there's always an opportunity for someone to move into this field and be successful. And I think it's working. So we started this 3 years ago with 19 students in our first paramedic class. We just enrolled 42 students in a paramedic class. And anybody that's listening that knows anything about paramedic programs, 42 students at once is unheard of. We have a day section and we have a night section, and we're just blown away. And our success rates are up there. They rival any traditional program. Our retention rates are probably much higher than most programs, and we're very proud of what we started. So I don't think it's so much that I'm creating a better provider, but I'm creating a better opportunity for people to become providers. By offering things in flexible formats and formats that work for adults that are working a job that may want to move into this field and otherwise wouldn't have an opportunity to do so.
I appreciate the passion and the mindset that you have towards this. And like you said, just the ability to help people actually succeed. So I think that's crucial. And I'm proud of you. So now go ahead and get started. I have some rapid fire questions that I did not prepare you for.
Oh my goodness, you lied to me.
It's
You said this is going to
not
be easy.
it's not a lie, it's a dishonest truth.
All right. Well, whatever that means, we'll take it.
All right. Question number 1. What is your favorite candy?
Jelly beans.
Really?
Hmm.
I'm just thinking of the butter popcorn one, and it makes me feel nauseous.
Well, I mean, there's different flavors, but overall,
It's not a bad choice. It's not mine. Question number 2. What temperature is your house on for you to be able to fall asleep?
oh, 69, 68 degrees. It's cold with a fan going.
Oh, anything below 70, I have to sleep with a sweatshirt on.
Well, I have a blanket and my dog snuggles up with me, but I like a cold house.
Yeah, I don't feel that. Like I don't want to be sweating, but like I hate that feeling of waking up and feeling cold. Like my feet being cold.
That makes sense.
Question number 3. Who was your favorite superhero from your childhood? And I'm not saying I'll judge you if it's anybody from Marvel. I'm just saying DC is better. But what's your answer?
So it has to be a superhero or just a hero? Because I don't know that I have a favorite superhero. I mean, probably Superman, but I was never really one to follow comics and superheroes and that sort of thing.
Just like from the movies and stuff.
Yeah, probably Superman.
Little Clark Kent.
Yeah, I like Christopher Reeves. I'm a traditionalist.
Mm, good choice. All he has to do is remove his sunglasses and nobody will recognize him.
It's legit.
All right. Go into the actual discussion points. Talking about your podcast. What inspired you to start the podcast? Like what was the, I don't want to say trail of thinking, but like what inspired you from the get-go of the idea of starting this podcast? Where do you want it to go?
Yeah, so there were a number of things. When I was a firefighter, I think some of the best times I had was sitting outside, the back of the bay. We'd pull out old chairs and we'd just sit around and tell stories. And I always thought that was just some great times that I shared with guys I worked with. And we, if we had somebody working on overtime that wasn't on our shift or we didn't work with on a regular basis, we got some new stories in there. Otherwise, we kept telling the same old stories over and over again. But firefighters like to tell stories, and there's some therapy there, right? So, sharing your experiences with other firefighters and other paramedics is definitely a therapeutic thing to do. I thought about writing a book, which I think I say in my opening. I originally thought I'd write a book, and the title of the book was going to be Stories from the Road. And you run these calls, and probably better than most. You run these calls, you have these experiences, and most people wouldn't believe you if unless they were there. So I thought it was interesting to take these stories and sort of rope them into a book. But going ahead a little bit, when I was going through grad school and I wrote my dissertation on military veterans and their experiences at community colleges. And sitting with those guys and hearing their stories, like I was able to pull their stories out and pull their, some lines out and some quotes and to match it up to my research and tell a story there. But I didn't tell the entire story from start to finish. And I thought, man, these are great stories, and these are stories that should be told, and these are military stories. So when I started thinking about doing something after I finished grad school, I started thinking about a podcast, and I went back to that book idea, and I went back to the idea of sitting behind the firehouse. And I said, what if I got a bunch of first responders, really just a bunch of friends of mine, to come on the podcast and to share some of those stories that they told when we were sitting behind Station 15 in Lawrenceville. And remarkably, they did it. And over the last couple of years that I've been doing the podcast, a lot of people have reached out, yourself included. I think you reached out to tell me that you enjoyed my podcast. We started having a conversation. I invited you on as a guest, and you told, just two just incredible stories. So that's where the podcast sort of came from, and that's where the style came from. Right now we're kind of on a hiatus. I've got probably about 7 or 8 stories in the can, and I'm ready to release a new season probably within the next couple of months. But it was a lot of work. It was it takes its toll on you too. It's hard to listen to these stories, especially when you've been away from it for so long. Going back and now hearing all these things, and stories are the same, right? It doesn't matter where you are in the country. It doesn't matter what job you're on. I have, there's one example in particular. I have 2 police officers that I spoke to who were both involved in line of duty shootings. Both ended up killing the suspect. This story is exactly the same. It happened on opposite coasts, but the basics of the story, how they were treated, their aftermath, I mean, it's identical. And it's the same for some of the fire stories that we told. So, so I think there is that therapeutic side of it. I think we all have these stories that may have happened in New York, or it happened in Texas, or it happened in California, but the stories are somewhat intertwined and somewhat similar. So for me, bringing guests on and sharing these stories, and then people listening to these stories and recognizing that they're not alone. The stories aren't unique to them. We're all going through these things. We've all had these experiences. For me, that sort of put the meaning into the podcast, right? It wasn't just a bunch of guys telling stories. It was people relating to those stories and recognizing that those stories aren't uniquely theirs.
And I love that because, like you talked about, like these stories are unique, and some of them, like you said, people won't believe unless they're actually there. But I think it's also the therapeutic effect of hearing what other people have gone through, hearing what other people have faced. And I mean, you can also learn from it. You can hear like what they did, what they didn't do, the rationale and stuff like that. And for me, I feel like I just learn a lot more with people telling their stories. And like, I love crew changes because it's the question of like, hey, what'd you guys do? What call did you have? And that kind of thing. And I mean, like you said, it's the learning and the reflection. And it's also a way of keeping like the passion and spirit behind why you joined EMS, and the impact that not just these calls have on you, not just the toll, but like your ability to interact with people and honestly like change lives, which sounds so cheesy and cliche, but I mean, um, what would you say is, I don't know how else to put it, the importance of like remembering that you're storytelling versus when one person talks about a call and the next person just one ups it. And then, just like the art of swapping stories and stuff like that, because I had an extensive report to do. So I had to come in on my day off, finish my report before the end of the 24 hours when it was due, blah, blah, blah. So like I have like all of my 12 lead strips, all my vital signs, all this stuff. So I could remember what we actually did, the times that I gave whatever medications. And there was this older medic that was sitting on the couch, and he was like, "Oh, what'd you have?" And I'm like, "Dude, we got there. Apparently the bystanders like had an AED. They did CPR, they shocked him. And like when got there and he was on the ground, and then he was in AFib with RVR, then he was SVT. So we cardioverted, we brought him to the hospital." Like it was awesome. And it was a good call. And I was like, and then after that, we had this wreck and blah, blah, blah. So he was like, "Oh, you think that's a lot? That's nothing. One Christmas, we had 5 cardiac arrests in one shift." I'm like, "Okay, I'll just turn around, mind my own business. Wasn't trying to act like it was impressive, but thank you. So, like, where would you say is the line between storytelling and then when people take that extra step and start using as like one-upping?
So I'm gonna flip your question on its side for just a second, then I'll answer the actual question you asked me. But I think it's funny that EMS. I mean, it probably happens across other industries as well. But I think it's always funny, depending on where you work, you're a tougher medic than the guy next to you, right? So when I was a New York City medic, I was a tougher medic than those guys in Nassau County with the single ambulances, all that fancy equipment. Because I worked for New York City, I was in the hood, right? Um, but I did 5 cardiac arrests on Christmas Eve and did 3 shootings on top of that, and then did all kinds of stuff. And I've got all these stories and all these calls that I ran. I think every single New York City medic has all these crazy calls. So I always thought it was funny when I would go down to when I was in Atlanta, I was outside of Atlanta, I was in Gwinnett County, and we were the fire department, and we were, we had the fancy uniform and we had the nice ambulance, and every once in a while we would go down to Grady, and Grady are the tough guys. They're working in Atlanta. They're cute. So they would see us come in with our Gwinnett County uniforms, and they'd one up us, or they'd be like, the whatever you want to call us, the pretty boys or whatever. And I always laugh to myself because I'm like, you know what? Like, you can say whatever you want. I can guarantee you I've seen more, I've done more. And I just kept my mouth shut, but it always made me laugh because they had no idea who they were talking to and what they were talking about. So I was would just, say, oh, you had a rough call, you did this, that's cute. But that's just the way it was. And I think in EMS, we inherently do that to each other. And I'm exaggerating a little bit, but we do. I think we look at like it's 911 versus the privates, right? Oh, you're a private, you're just doing transports. You're not as, look at your eyes rolling. You're not a big badass medic like me because I'm working 911. And then the guys that are working in the inner city are like, oh man, I'm working in the inner city. I'm doing 2 cardiac arrests a night, and I had 3 shootings last week. And I'm like, well, that's cute. I worked in New York City in the 90s. Just shut up. But that being said, on the podcast, there on my podcast, at least there isn't any of that for a couple of reasons. One, I bring on one guest at a time. So with very few exceptions, it's usually a one-on-one conversation. The other thing is I am not trying to, at the least, one up my guests. I'm grateful that they are on the podcast. I'm glad that they are telling the story. I'm as respectful about it as I can be. I recognize that just by telling the story, we're opening up some trauma. We're opening up some wounds. So I'm very respectful to them. And there is no one-upping. I think when I do my introduction, the last thing I say is I'll turn the mic over to you and let you share your story from the road. And it's their show at that point. It's their story to tell. I may chime in. I may, share some of my experiences that go along and enhance what they're talking about, or sort of meet up with what they're talking about. But there is no one-upping, at least not on my podcast. We don't do that. But I think it's interesting because we do that everywhere else in EMS. And I think people probably do it in other industries as well. We just don't know about it because it's not our industry. But people certainly do it. And I don't know why we do it. I think everybody wants to listen so they can say the next thing, as opposed to listening so they can better understand what somebody's saying.
I laughed at the thing you said about the private ambulance versus the where we run. I work for a private ambulance company, and there's a municipal major city ambulance company, and you can always
with a television show.
Oh, with the so you so like if we roll up at one of their hospitals, because at that time we had a transfer, they look at us differently.
Yeah.
And it's so unnecessary. And I've kind of adopted that thing that you talked about, like just keeping your mouth shut. Because like we're bringing our patient in and they're giving us like that side look or whatever. And I just want to turn around and be like, you know what I did this morning? So much. Keep your mouth closed. I get a road trip on the way back. What do you get to do? 5 calls.
Right. Work smarter, not harder. But I mean, that's part of it too. And that's why I always would smile to myself and just think, keep talking about me as I'm walking by. You're cute. And I mean, if you want to go toe to toe, we can go toe to toe, but there's no point there. It's stupid. It's stupid that we try and one up each other. You're just as much a medic as the guy that's running, those 18 calls in a 12-hour shift. You're just doing a different work. And the, if the privates weren't there, then the 911 guys would be doing 911 and transports, right? Or vice versa. And, honestly, you get to a point in your career where, the shooting is great, but the 5 sick calls that lead up to the shooting are really a pain in the neck that nobody wants to run. So, great, you got a shooting, but you also did a whole bunch of stuff that I didn't have to deal with because I was working on a private ambulance. And I cut my teeth on a private ambulance. I know what a dialysis transport looks like, and I've done all the hospital discharges, and they're not fun. But everybody's got to start somewhere. And everybody's got to do their job, and it's a system. It's a system for a reason. So, I guess even 911 versus 911, city versus suburban. It's really a stupid comparison. Everybody's doing the same job. They're just doing it in a different place.
Yeah. And my little plug, the agency that I grew up in EMS, the one I worked at last year in Utah, the one I work at now, honestly, they've all been private, but it's been such a good mix of like, we run good calls and we also run dumb calls. And then we have our transfers that, like, now as a medic, like, I don't get upset about the dialysis transfer because it gives me a break. So I think it's a good mix of both. And even still, with like some of your hospital transfers, they can be pretty serious. And it's not just like somebody with abnormal labs or going to the higher level care. Like, they can be serious sometimes, but
Mhm.
I don't know, a lot of that pride and attitude aspect, it's completely unnecessary. Because like you said, we're all doing the same thing. Like, we all have this, you have the patch. Congrats. You have arrived. Take a back seat. Nobody's impressed.
Yeah, it's all the same to you. I'll just drive.
Right. Dude, sometimes I'll look at my partner and I'm like, sis, I'm 3 reports deep. We are not going to take this transfer. Please, for me. I'm dying. Okay. I want to flip the script on you instead of you asking about calls. So, Klein, what is a call that has impacted you?
What's a call that's impacted me?
Mhm.
Oh, there's so many. I think one of the, I will tell you that there's a call that stuck with me for a while. When I was a fireman in when I lived in New York and I was on Long Island, I was a medic for the police department. I was still a fireman in volunteer house. And we had a kid that would come by, had cystic fibrosis, and he would come by and see the fire trucks, and he would light up and have a great time. And I think I was off. I don't think I was. I know I wasn't working I wasn't working the police department job. I know I was off. I don't know if I was at the firehouse or if I was at my house. I think I was at the firehouse because the kid's mom, and this is going back a long time, so I'm trying to remember everything about it, but I believe the kid's mom brought the kid to the firehouse and he was really having a hard time breathing. And again, we either toned it out, and I lived right around the block from the firehouse. We either toned it out and I got there right away, or I was at the firehouse. I can't remember, but I do remember working on the kid. And I remember, he wasn't breathe. He got to a point where he wasn't able to breathe anymore. And I had to make a decision, right? So his kid with cystic fibrosis. So I've either got to force air into his lungs and risk a pneumo, or I could not bag him at all, and he's going to die either way. So I remember bagging him, and I want to say I tubed him, but I don't know that I did. But his skin turned this fluorescent pink color because we were filling him up with air, and we were being careful. We were trying not to overinflate his lungs, but we just couldn't get any air in, so we were forcing it in. This is long before any other intervention that we had. I don't think I tubed him. I can't remember that I did, or I was waiting for some help to get there before I tubed him. But I just remember I remember the kid's face, and this is a kid that had come by, and we had loved to see the fire trucks. And whenever we saw him, we were the firehouse was in a neighborhood, so we saw kids all the time. But we would always bring them in and show them the trucks. And then there we are on the ramp of the firehouse and trying to save this kid's life. And it was actually the county that showed up. It was one of my field training officers that was working that day, and he was, I mean, I'll just say it, he was a dick. But he was a good medic, but he was an asshole. There was a comedian, and I'm going to date myself, Andrew Dice Clay. I don't know if anybody remembers Andrew Dice Clay, but go watch some YouTube and don't watch it around any kids. But he would tell dirty nursery rhymes and stuff like that. But this guy, we used to call him Dice Man because he had the same attitude. But he was the medic from the county that showed up, and we worked him. We got him to the back of the county bus, and he transformed. The kid ended up passing away, and it was inevitable. But I remember just being shaken by it, right? Because it was one of those times where you've got to make a decision. You've got to make a decision to do something. And I think I bagged him. I had to. I tried to bag him as carefully as I could, but I knew I blew out his lungs. But I couldn't. I had to squeeze the bag hard to get air in, because if I didn't, I wasn't going to get anything into him. But in doing that, we ended up blowing out his lungs. So we ended up with pneumos, and it was just one of those calls. And that call sat with me for a long time. And I remember I called Rich that night, and I wanted to talk the call through with him. And I just, I bounced it off of him. What do you think I could have done? Is there anything I could have done different? What would you have done? And this guy who was I don't want to say he was a jerk, but he was, if you know who Andrew Dice Clay is, you know who this guy is. And we had a real heart to heart. He was like, listen, man, you did everything you could. There was nothing that you could have done different on this kid. Absolutely nothing. The outcome was going to be what the outcome was, no matter how you did it. But I was young. I mean, I was new to that police job, and I was still a young medic. And it was just one of those calls. And it sticks with me. I mean, I'm telling the story and I could see the kid's face. But it sticks with you over time. And there's probably a number of calls, some on the fire side and some on the paramedic side, that just stand out and just stick. And I think a lot of them are based more so in decision than action.
And something that I feel like your podcast brings to light. Yes, it is like you just talked about. You can still see faces. You can remember names. You can drive past a house and remember a call that you went on, like, oh yeah, that house, that's where we had the cardiac arrest. Or there's one house I passed by and I'm like, yeah, that's that overdose. But it's that lasting impact of the decision-making process. Do I do this or do I do that? What are the repercussions of either one? And then even though we try not to, that lingering question of what else could I have done? And that's what we beat ourselves up about. Even if like you said, like there's nothing else we could have done, or in our training, like we did all we can do. We're not an ER. That's what, like the whole thing of like, we're an ER on wheels. I don't have an X-ray machine in the back of my ambulance. Like, no. But yeah, that's a hard call, man. And I would just like to say, if anybody would have been there for that kid, I'm glad it was you, man.
Well, I appreciate that.
So one last thing. What advice would you give to people still in the EMS field?
Go become a nurse. I don't know. I don't know that I'm in a position to give advice. I mean, I think if you're in the EMS field, and I jokingly just said become a nurse, but if you're in the EMS field, then God bless you, because you're doing one of the toughest jobs out there. It's I did it for a long time, and I don't regret a minute of it. It was some of the best years of my life, but it's a difficult job. And I think, you and I are, I don't know, what are we, about 25 years apart, 20 years apart. When I worked my career, we didn't talk about anything. You kept your mouth shut. If it bothered you, you went and drank, or you did something else, or you made some horrific jokes, and everybody moved on. And I'm glad that things have, significantly changed in EMS. Right? People are recognizing that they need some help, that they need someone to talk to, and it's not taboo anymore. Right? You don't have to be ashamed because a call's bothering you. It's not a sin to ask for help. I think other first responders, it's a lot more difficult. Police, especially, it's really difficult to ask for help. But I think for EMS professionals, it's not as hard to ask for help anymore. That help is available. And I think the younger folks coming into this field are more apt to ask for help when they need it. I think just that generation, I think it's Gen Z now, or whatever the next letter is. I have a son that's 20 years old, and when he was in high school, he was having a really hard time, and he came to me and he's like, "Dad, this is what's going on." And I was shocked because I would never go to my dad and say, "Hey, listen, this happened and I'm really upset about it." My dad would say, "Shut up and go mow the lawn." But that's the difference, right? It's a different generation, and these kids are willing to talk, and they're moving into these fields, and they're willing to talk about things. So, not that mental health isn't a huge issue in EMS, but I think things are getting better. So I guess my advice is for anybody that's still in the field is find someone to talk to before you need someone to talk to. Whether it's getting therapy, whether it's hooking up with a counselor, whether it's a good friend that you can bounce things off of, but find that connection and have that person that you can talk to, because the things that you're going to see, and it better than most. And again, I'm going back to the calls that you've told me about. The things that we see, the things that we do, I'm really good at putting in a box and keeping in the back of my head somewhere, but it's always back there, and I never had the opportunity, or I may have had the opportunity, but I never took advantage of it to talk those things through. So they're still there. But these younger guys that are coming into EMS have the opportunity. I think they're a lot more open to talking about what they're experiencing. And I think it's important to capitalize on that, make those connections, have those people in place that you can share what's going on inside your head with. And I think it'll be a lot healthier, at least in terms of your mental health. So talk to somebody, have that outlet, and go become a nurse. Don't
Or if
become an
not,
EMS instructor.
or if not a nurse, there are other avenues.
There
I'm
are
going
other
to end up
avenues. They could be a school
respiratory
teacher.
therapy. No, not a school
Respiratory
teacher.
therapy. You still get to two people. That's not a bad day.
Facts. Or
The
just pass that little.
respiratory therapist still two people, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, then there you go.
On a bad day, the worst case that's happened to me is I've suctioned out a trach.
That's not bad.
It's not.
I just wanted a two people when I became, that was because when I became a medic, they had EMT CCs, or critical care EMTs, kind of like the AEMT now, but they couldn't tube anybody. So I became a medic because I wanted a two people. I don't know. It sounded cool.
It's cool. I know other medics that are like tube hungry.
Mm-hmm.
And like I appreciate when I get a good one, but I just love holding Meemaw's hand on the way to the hospital.
Yeah. All kidding aside, I was a terrible medic, but I could talk to people in the back of an ambulance. And I think I helped more people by just having conversations with them in the back of an ambulance than anything else that I ever did. I can't tell you how much, of a drug to push. I just, two fingers, but that much is plenty. But man, you could do some real good stuff in the back of an ambulance, just talking. And the stories that you see. So I used to, we talked before about private ambulances, right? So I would do a lot of private ambulance transports, and I would have long rides. And a lot of those guys were World War II veterans, and I'm a big history buff. So I would sit in the back of an ambulance and just talk about World War II with somebody who was there. Like if I got somebody that hit the beaches of Normandy, man, my day was made. You can have 5 cardiac arrests on Christmas Eve and 3 shootings, and you could be a hero. But I'm talking to this guy about, the D-Day landing. And that was a fantastic night. So yeah, you're 100% right. Those conversations in the back of the ambulance probably are more therapeutic than anything else.
Absolutely. And my favorite thing is when you pick up that older gentleman or older lady and like their significant other is there, and like they're doing some kind of like little bickering. And so you get them in the back, you do whatever you got to do. You're on the way to the hospital, and you're like, how long have you guys been married? And they're like, oh, 40 some years or 50 some years, whatever it is. And so I always ask, what's the secret sauce to a good marriage? And sometimes it's really sweet answers. My favorite ones are, she's always right, or just shut your mouth. Just spunky answers. Quality. So, man, that's all I got. You want anything else?
No, I always enjoy talking to you, and it's fun reliving some of those days. I don't get to have as much fun anymore. Being a paramedic was a lot more fun than being a vice president. So, um, I always say I had the greatest job in the world, and for some reason I gave it up.
Management isn't always what it looks like it's cracked up to be. So, Bill, I appreciate you in your experience, in your friendship. You one of the homies. But go check out Phil's podcast, Stories from the Road. I subscribe on Spotify. Where else are you at?
I'm all over the place. Google, Apple Podcasts. I think we're on just about every platform, and we are putting out a new season. It's coming out in, I don't know, probably mid-October. We'll get it out. We've got a couple more interviews to do. Maybe you'll come on my podcast again and tell story number 3. See if I can talk you into that.
I'm trying to give a positive one.
Yeah, give me one more. We're not all down after we hear it. But those are important. And you tell, and I'll brag on you a little bit, because as young as you are in this field, and I know you're not 19 years old, but as young as you are in this field, and the things that you had to deal with so early in your career, man, I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you get up in the morning and go back to work, because you had at least the 2 calls that you shared with me were, I mean, they were horrific calls, and you told them so well. And I think everybody that listens to those 2 episodes, they're standing right there with you, whether they're in the bathroom or on the side of the road. And they're right there with you because you do such a great job telling those stories. And those are the important stories to tell. So maybe you'll come back on the podcast and tell something, and we'll all laugh for a change. But I'm not taking anything away from the stories that you previously shared, because they are so important, and you did such a great job telling them.
I'm blushing. Also about to cry. So, Bill, like I said, appreciate you. Love the podcast. Can't push it enough. Go check it out. It's good stuff. It is good stuff. So, Phil, if that's all you got, that's all I got.
That's it. I don't have much.
And as I end every episode, so with that,
the 22 at the Lips podcast is designed to support, not replace, the relationship that exists between a practitioner and his or her medical director. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host, guest, and not necessarily of Master Medics. The information provided during this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for your approved protocols.